And we chose, like, based on our network and what we wanted to do, to kind of work it around Sophie and trying to cure her, because we know with that we cure hundreds, thousands of other kids as well. I had ideas in my mind of that celebration someday. It's not going to be quick, but like, what's that party going to be like?
It's the holiday season, and we are excited to bring you a story told by a G&N client. They're going through an interesting time this holiday season, and they need your help. When you listen to this story told by Jamas about what him and his family are going through, it's just impressive, the positivity that they keep when times are this tough. Matt, you and I have been through so much in COVID, leading a team, being family men, really just trying to be supportive to those around us as well. When we were going through this interview with Jamas, I was like choking up, being like, wow, I could do so much more.
It gave us a lot of perspective. And I think anyone listening to this podcast and this interview, it'll help them with perspective, any challenges they're going through, whether it's health related or not. Because you listen to this father of two, who a year ago found out that his younger daughter has a crazy rare disease and there's no cure. A lot of people could be left hopeless in that case. And he acted like a lot of fathers and parents would, and created a foundation and has raised a lot of money and pushes a lot towards research to cure this disease. And it just gives a lot of perspective on what challenges we're all facing, and that there's always someone facing something harder.
Yeah, give it a listen. We're going to put in the show notes how you can best donate to the cause if you so wish to. Just sharing this podcast would be a monster win for Jamas and his family. Donating would be incredible, but here we go. So today we're going to spin this big W a little differently, and we're going to be talking with you, Jamas, about entrepreneurship in a very different way. How you have kind of started this journey is also how a lot of other entrepreneurs start this journey where they're like, I didn't mean to do that. Matt and I are so honored to have you on this podcast to really talk about the foundation you formed, talk about the journey, talk about the ups and the downs, and really just life as a dad dealing with what you're dealing with. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. And you guys have been huge supporters since the start. Zach, you remember, I think you were my first phone call. I'm like, does anybody really care? It's similar when you start a business. Do they care? Do they want to help? A lot of friends and family were like, yeah, of course. But then I'm like, we got to start reaching out to corporations and companies. And of course, you start with people you know.
Give us a little bit background where you live and that kind of stuff first.
I live in Hopkinton, grew up in the area. Went to Babson College, so stayed local. And I've been at Dell. I was an EMC guy, so local, literally. Talk about never leaving the state, geez. So I was at EMC for 10 years, and we had this gigantic merger, big news with Dell, which scared the crap out of me, of course. But now I'm up on 15 years between Dell and EMC. So I'm in sales. Didn't think I'd be in it this long. Didn't think I'd be in technology. Had no technical background coming out of school, but it's worked and it's enjoyable, and it's allowed me to do things that we're doing right now with the foundation as well.
Jamas, you don't look a day over 30. So 15 years at Dell, it must have been a young internship.
No, I started right out of school. I used to be the young guy.
For our listeners, you could go back to September of 2019, kind of share with us your particular experience.
A little different aha moment. So in September 2019, Sophie had, we've been going through some testing and dealing with different doctors, but as a parent, you just kind of always assume like, she's fine. Like, come on, really? Like, she'll be fine. Like, we're healthy parents. Like, she seems all right. But we got the news that through blood testing and all these different genetics testings we had done, that she had an incredibly rare, we're talking 1 in a million. So kind of the rarest of the rare genetic disease. And it's a blood sugar disease called Glycogen Storage Disease. I guarantee no listener has heard of it unless they've become familiar with the foundation. And that's part of what we're trying to do. But so, yeah, September 2019, diagnosed, and we just started to try to figure things out. My wife's a nurse, so like that has allowed me to spend a lot of time on the foundation and fundraising and learning about gene therapy and research. But, having her as the teammate in this has been a big relief, because she has navigated all the doctor visits, finding new doctors and all that sort of thing. So we just, started to figure it out. There is a point where for a couple months, there's a little bit of denial.
What kind of symptoms was Sophie having that what was going on?
Some parents find out when the baby's born. Kids unresponsive, like super low blood sugar, all these horrible symptoms. With Sophie, it wasn't that way. She was on the smaller size, which is one of the things. She was not eating very well. We were taking her to a food therapist and trying to get her to eat solid foods and trying to figure it out. And then she got better with that. But she also, to pile on, she had a dairy and egg allergy. So that led us to do a lot of blood tests and stuff. But through some good work of some doctors, we had a hematologist at Children's look at her labs and say something looked off. And they quickly referred her lab work to the genetics organization at Boston Children's. And it sucked to hear that. And the last thing you want to hear as a parent is rare disease, life-threatening, no cure. It was like, okay, all right, where do we go from here? So that was how we found out. So again, one of those, I guess, positives is we found it. We knew what it was. We had somewhat of a plan on how to kind of keep her safe. And the younger you figure it out, the less damage has been done, you can kind of keep her in a pretty healthy state. But her body can't absorb sugar the way that most humans' bodies can. So you can get buildup in the organs. That's a bad side effect. And also, obviously, her blood sugars will spike. Insulin kicks in, and then she cannot bring her energy back up. So that's why the perfect diet, like low carbs, no sugar at all. So every 4 hours for her, she has to drink cornstarch just to kind of keep her energy stable. And that's even at night. Other big component of her disease, type 1B, because there's different types of GSD, is that she has low white blood cells. So for anyone that doesn't know, that is your body's first line of defense. So you get the sniffles, you get a little tiny infection, usually for most of 90% of it, your white blood cells kill it off and you're fine. So when kids have really low white blood cells, they're just constantly in the hospital for infections, or colds turn into viral infections. So that's treated with another, actually we have to give her a shot every 2 days to kind of boost her low white blood cells. Those are the two main symptoms of it.
So for everybody complaining about quarantining, trying to be staying away from getting sick, it's kind of
no, it's our life. Yeah. Like the quarantine thing, for us, we might dodge a flu season. The kids aren't in schools and we don't feel weird keeping Sophie home. And so, that is our everyday life, just constantly washing hands, keeping her away from things. But at the same time, we can't shelter her. She has to have fun. I guess we have to adjust to life like that, but we can't let it rule our life because that'll affect Sophie and, we also her older sister too. So
how many doctors know about this, work on it, research it? I mean, if it's that rare, is there many people out there working on this?
We were seeing a doctor at Boston Children's and everybody thinks Boston Children's is the best, and they are at most things. They didn't have any doctors that really knew much about GSD. We got some not great advice early on in the process. So we started looking around and immediately, all fingers pointed to Dr. Weinstein. He was doing his research at UConn Health, and then he was doing his clinical care at Connecticut Children's. We're like, all right, we're an hour and 15 minutes away to the world-renowned GSD doctor, the only one, right? So he's doing research. He's basically responsible for anyone that's healthy and over the age of 10. I mean, Dr. Weinstein's responsible for them being where they are. Wrote the book on GSD care, but so this is where the story gets twisted, though. And I'm trying to stay positive, but so Dr. Weinstein, he's amazing. There's usually a 3-year wait list to get in and see him. 700 patients from across the globe. Everyone wants to go see him. And when you go see him, you get admitted for 3 days. They run all these tests. It really sets you up to care for your child. So we were supposed to get in there 2021. I got a Facebook message from a friend of a cousin who was like, I think I know the head nurse for Dr. Weinstein. I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. Let's get in touch. And so even before we had an appointment, my wife was talking to the head nurse of the GSD program, which was amazing. And then I said to my wife, I'm like, let's just start fundraising. I don't know where to turn or do what, but if we're raising money for research, I'll at least get a meeting with this guy. So through UConn, we didn't have a foundation at the time, but when we finally kind of let people know what was going on, people would ask, what can we do to help? At the time, we didn't know. And I said to Margot, my wife, I'm like, we need to be able to capitalize on. So UConn Health helped us set up a fund that would just go right to research. And basically, Dr. Weinstein would have access to the money as it came in. So long story short, between December of 2019 till just into January, we raised $60,000 just through purely online. Like, I'm not a big social media guy. I'm trying to work on it, but like Facebook, Instagram, like all those different things, emailing people, texting people. And so I think that plus having some connections, we got a call and they were like, hey, we got a cancellation in February of 2020. Why don't you come in? So we're like, oh, jackpot. Like, we're going to figure this whole thing out.
That must have been just such a cool moment because you did this completely on a whim. It could have just been like, hey, thank you so much for the donation. We need this money and see you in 2021.
But even just like us admitting we had a problem, like even though it was our kid and it wasn't her choice and it's genetic, we felt like we were being closed in on a little bit, right? And so it felt like a relief when I finally told everybody like what was going on. I was scared that the reaction was going to be nothing, like people just kind of like whatever. And Margot and I have balanced this act for a year of like, how much do we want people to know? Because we don't want to be those people that always say this sucks or, we're dealing with Sophie, we got to give her shots today, or we're going to the hospital again. So it's like, we're trying to balance that positive outlook, which we do have, like we genuinely do, but how real do we want to be with people? Because, you don't want to be the guy getting kind of left off the invite because you're always bringing it up.
That's such a hard balance though. And I'm sure you guys have constant conversations between the two of you because you want to be positive, not only for everyone's sake, that can drive in good results, but also for her sake.
Yeah, and absolutely.
At the same time, the topic needs to be talked about in order for you to create awareness.
It was almost like that fundraiser for us, which was through UConn. We didn't have a foundation at the time, was like a litmus test, right? Do people really care? There's no risk, right? The risk is our ego, right? Like, this is going to suck. Like, nobody cares. But the outpouring, I mean, I think we had 500 unique donors to raise 60,000. I mean, that gave us something to talk to Dr. Weinstein about. And when we got in there to see him in February, think about the timing of that. So I think it was mid-February. At our 3-day stay, driving home, I remember like, this is going to be hard, we said to each other, but we kind of got this figured out. Like, we've got a plan. For me, I just need a plan. Tell me what I have to do. I will execute it as long as I know the outcome is what it will be. So drove home that day feeling pretty optimistic. Like, all right, I think like we're going to figure this out. Like, she'll be okay. And he also let us really in on all the research. For me, I was like, I don't get it. Like, I'm like, all right, gene therapy, gene editing, enzyme treatment. I'm trying to think this through. And he's like, hey, don't write anything down. You got to sign NDAs. He's telling me company names. I'm like, geez, I'm not going to remember anything. It was a whirlwind. But that also left me, I'm like, this guy's got it figured out. Like, he's going to cure. There's no doubt. He already had type 1A, which is the most common GSD in human clinical trials, and it was going really well. So they had the gene therapy administered to a couple patients. Super optimistic that it was going to ultimately be a way to cure that type 1A. Now, we'll talk about 1B is a little more complex and there's a lot of more work that needs to go into it, but at least I'm like, okay, they know what they're doing. He was optimistic with me about treatment and what was going to happen. So we left that feeling pretty good. COVID hit and like, I didn't want to think about it, but I'm like, could there be an impact? I know hospitals are struggling. Like, this is a rare disease. Like, it's not making them any money. Like, if anything, they're losing money. And I'm thinking as a business person, we got a text late in March and it was the development officer at UConn. So yeah, she told us that Dr. Weinstein is gone. He was like that's our guy. I was literally thinking of him as he's like our God. Like, I mean, there's nobody more important to us at that time. They were furloughing everyone in the GSD programs. All these years, they built out this program, private donations, everything, and they were shutting it down. And Dr. Weinstein, and I don't know all the details, there was probably some disagreement with the hospital, and he took an offer to go back to private sector. And I'm still hoping he'll resurface because this definitely was his life passion. And we're so thankful for everything he did. But that was like, Margot and I cried. I was like, you got to be kidding me. We thought we had this figured out. Again, same thing. Cry for a couple minutes. And then it's like, all right, what's next?
At that point, you guys are talking. What did you guys do from there? I mean, what was that next step?
Quickly, we knew like there's not many doctors. So what's next? Thank goodness we had that relationship with the head nurse, and we had built enough of a relationship with Dr. Weinstein that we were able to speak to both of them the next day. A lot of people didn't even know what happened. There's not enough doctors out there, and we don't want to be waitlisted. We need care, and we're competitive, and thank God. So he had a recommendation of a doctor in Boston. This doctor seems awesome. She seems interested. She had a history where she had done some research in GSD. She knew Dr. Weinstein. I'm like, maybe this is better. I don't know. Maybe we have a doctor back here in Boston. So we feel like we are back in a good place with Sophie's care, because with GSD, it's like we are constantly emailing with the doctor. Like we're talking, if not daily, every other day. So like you need, especially Margot again, like needs to feel comfortable with that doctor, that they're listening, that they're adjusting dosages and all that stuff. So I think, again, losing him was terrible, but we got another good doctor and that's been working out. And then at the same time, my mind quickly went to research. I'm like, oh God, maybe we'll figure out her care, but like we can't lose all this. I mean, I don't forget the money we're raising, but like all this progress. And I had ideas in my mind of that celebration someday. It's not going to be quick, but like, what's that party going to be like? It just felt like, geez, again, like another blow. However, UConn Health did decide to keep their research lab open. So again, like, and so through that, Dr. Weinstein had a guy leading his research, Dr. Lee. Guy is a brilliant doctor, researcher, and I reached out to him. I emailed him and he emailed me right back. And like I set up a Zoom with him and a couple of other families that were really worried about like research, because Dr. Weinstein was bringing in a ton of the money. He was like a marketer. He was going out giving speeches. Every patient that went to see him, there were some be like, who do I write a check to? Like, I want to donate, and you lose that. Like 700 patients are now spread across the globe. So you're like, geez, so you lose that. So then I started doing even more research about the actual research. And like, there was really no specific 1B fund. After we did that first fundraiser, I was like, every year I can't just send an email out or put something on Facebook and direct people to UConn Health for a donation. I mean, people would probably still donate, but we'll never get to where we want to go. And, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that we'd eventually need to put together. So I had already been thinking about the foundation. Like, what do we do? Like, how do we engage people better? Like, how do we create a little bit of a brand and get people behind it? Because it's such a personal thing. And I would Google how to start a foundation, and I literally would start sweating. And I'm like, this is brutal. The legal stuff, I'm like, I don't know if I can figure this out. There was just nowhere to start, really.
There's a couple of things that you highlighted in that story I think is super interesting. I think the comparisons between entrepreneurship are everywhere, by the way. When you look at leadership, it's very similar to being a mom and a dad. They're very, very comparable. But the grit that you two showed just to keep carrying this through in every single example is just so prevalent.
I will say, Zach, grit is my favorite adjective for anybody. So yeah, that's a good one.
It's just so prevalent. I know Matt and I are just nodding, just being like, you can think of personal examples when we just try to keep the company alive, let alone like your daughter. But there's a lot of studies on people who have like incredibly traumatic injuries, such as being caught under a vehicle or a shark attack or something ridiculously massive where they like lose a limb. Mm-hmm. And they're interviewed after, and there are studies that show that they never regret getting in the water. They never regret riding that wave where the shark attacked them. And they actually sometimes look at life as like better because of it. It's a very strange sensation, but it's just, you can give many lie detector tests in the world. They're like, life is actually better without my left limb. But as you're going through this story, it's really clear that like a lot of this gave you and Margot like a really strong purpose and like maybe even a stronger marriage.
I will say it's all we talk about, unfortunately. It's certainly challenging in that regard. But yeah, it's like you talk about your wife's your teammate. Like we've been able to kind of have our own niches and roles. So no, it certainly has. And I think we can't judge other people's challenges based on ours, right? Everybody's going through something. So perspective, even going through this COVID and in quarantining, like, a lot of people have it a lot worse. So even with that, it's like, okay, let's put it in perspective. We're home. We're bored, we're on Zooms all day, but we're still collecting paychecks and we still have a roof over our head. But in terms of like Sophie and everything, that's just given us a ton of perspective.
It's so true. I mean, like both of our kids, Mason and Emma, have both chipped their front tooth. And Emma has turned gray and it's stayed that way. It's not that that's our worst problem, but from a perspective standpoint, I know KG is all the time like, oh, the pictures are going to look horrible. Like every single time she's going to look like this and people are going to judge us because like, she tripped and fell on concrete, Zach, like and she's right. But it is true. Like if you asked KG, like the day after that happened with Emma, she'd probably be in the dumps. And I was in the dumps because I was the one watching him at the time. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't know what other parents and other entrepreneurs are going through. And depending on the day, their world could be ending.
I think it's also like, I think perspective and empathy too. I feel like I've done a better job now reaching out to other people, right? A buddy of mine's son is autistic. We never talk about it because I don't know if it's going to make him uncomfortable, or, you know, someone's going through a divorce, but you don't want to bring it up. But, you know, going through it on my end, I'm like, when people ask me how Sophie's doing, I'm like, I get a little jump in my step. I want to talk about it. It's not going to put me in the dumps. If anything, it's going to get me excited. So for us, it's kind of that. I really don't like the term, it is what it is, but like at some point, like
accept the reality and adjust and pivot. Yeah. Coming back to kind of where you were in your path, you know, you'd had some success fundraising through UConn via email and their setup.
Platform.
You had decided that you might want to give it a go on your own, trying to create your own foundation and fundraise that way. But obviously you'd never done it before. And there wasn't a lot of like helpful information by Googling. And Zach and I, you know, starting a business, it's different, but it's somewhat similar. With no experience ever doing it before. Like, we didn't know what came first. Do you file legally? Do you get a lawyer? How much is it going to cost? How long does it take? Like, we did it backwards. And so we can relate to the challenge that you'd have in that moment. How did you get through that? Like, tell us about what that process was and like the culminating.
That test to us was important because I knew I was going to put some money into this, right? Which is fine. It was very low risk to start a foundation, but we had to build a website. We had to get a logo. We got to get incorporated, all those things. Or do we just stick with using someone else's platform and try to do GoFundMes? We felt, and having something like this is a source of pride for the family. Like my mother, Margot's mother, everyone's sharing out information, like wearing the hats, wearing the t-shirts, having a logo. So a couple of times I'd Google it, get all bent out of shape. And I think it was one of your podcasts, somebody brought up, maybe it was Manny, perfection is the enemy of progress. And man, that like, I always like, the shirts have to be perfect. I was so maniacal about it that it definitely slowed me down. Probably like 6 months of overanalyzing things. What I realized is even once I submit everything, I could be waiting 6 months for the IRS to get approval. So that hit home because I was like, I still do it. Like, I'm still like, that hat isn't perfect. Like, I'm going to redo it. But I did that a couple times, stops and starts, a lot of Google searches, a lot of sleepless nights. Finally, Margot every time would just be like, just do it. Like, you know what you're doing. I have a little bit of a background in business. I'm networking is one of my strengths. So I will say, after all my Google searches, I found a company for X amount of dollars, which wasn't anything outrageous, would do all the paperwork. And I'm like, done. I'm like, that's the only way that I will force myself to do it. I paid for that stuff out of pocket. I wanted it. I didn't want any of it to come out of what would eventually be the foundation. And then from there, once I forced myself to put a little skin in the game, I was like, okay, now like the work starts. And it was talking about like just not knowing. I'm like, all right, well, I need a logo. But again, I don't know how to use Adobe or any of those tools. So kind of found my brother-in-law's buddy did it on the side, and he did a phenomenal job at no cost. I had zero budget, zero employees. So trying to do everything on a tight budget. But then I did speak with another friend of mine who had started a foundation, and that was incredibly helpful. And I think there should be more of that in the nonprofit space. And that's part of what I'm trying to be more helpful, a resource for other organizations. Because if somebody would have told me in month one that it really wasn't that hard and you could do it, I probably would have saved myself 6 months of like agonizing over the decision. So that was really helpful. And it kind of forced me to just suck it up and do it.
There's something beautiful about just diving in. And I think people who've never done it before, like it's in essence, it's kind of just creating art. I go back to this Lou Holtz talk whenever I'm stuck. There's this Lou Holtz speech that I always listen to. One of the things he jokes about is he had this field goal kicker, and he claimed he didn't like kicking the field goals when Lou Holtz was there. And he was like, I get nervous when you're there. And Lou Holtz just looked at him and said, well, son, I expect to be at most of the games as a head coach. But in essence, it was like, you're just going to have to get over that.
You realize when you start knocking tasks off, how good it feels. I'm like, okay, website's done. That made me feel legit. I was very anal about everything being perfect because I just feel like it's my daughter's name. I think I would trade anything in the world to not have had to do it. But once we started doing it, it was a sense of pride. And I'm like, I think we can do something great here.
What did you do next? And explain how that golf thing kicked in and what the mission really is moving forward.
This whole golf tournament thing, we had a date in June. probably by May or April, I was like, there's no way. So I talked to the course. He was like, shoot, like we'll give you a Tuesday in September. I'm like, it's kind of awkward, but like, let's just do it. And then if you guys remember like the waves of COVID, it was looking good in the middle of the summer. And I'm like, all right, we might be out of it, and then getting closer, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And then the last thing I want to do is be responsible for any problems.
So you're organizing this golf event. You're researching how to ask and who gave money. And, obviously we're a proud sponsor, but it's not about us. But what I am curious about, without naming names, did anyone say no? And if they did, how'd that go?
I think our conversation, that was part of the message, right? Was like, it can't hurt to ask. Nobody said no. Some people agreed to like lower tiers. Just getting people on board was huge, but you make no money off the greens fees. I mean, unless you're, making it super expensive. So all the money is made by corporate sponsors. Whole sponsors are incredible. That is the bread and butter.
I'm going to just call myself out for two things. One, like I always assumed way back in the day that like I was like God's greatest gift if I showed up to a charity tournament because here I am donating money. But like Matt and I did find out over time that it really is the sponsors. But whole sponsors sometimes to us felt like, nah, just because you put like a little stamp next to.
So good.
Yeah, but it's great hearing that. I think people need to listen back to that as like, it really does matter and it really helps the cause. It's not just about the advertising. Like who cares about that?
And I will say people were such good sports. You come and check in and, it's awkward, right? Here's the 50-50 raffle. We're selling this but people just, sure, $100 in that. I'm like, wow, we almost didn't do that. And that like day of money collection was like $7,600 or something.
How much was raised for the foundation?
So for that day, we raised like 68 grand, which is unbelievable. And we had to limit the number of people.
Well, especially because of COVID. I think that's what's so impressive is that's a successful tournament any time of year and any year. But
I want this to be one of the best tournaments they've ever played in. So you'll see like next year, like we're going to New Seabury, we're booking both courses. We're going to make this a destination for people so that it's not like, I got to go to that charity tournament. I tried to create an atmosphere where like networking mattered, right? Like, hey, a couple real estate agents, why don't you guys go meet Zach and Matt or whatever it was. But COVID threw me for a loop. I had to create every tee time. Like it just created a lot of extra work, but those whole sponsors at the end, like that netted close to like 7 or 8 grand.
What's going to be so fun about this interview and people listening to this is like, just don't understand how much your money matters to like these kind of causes. And it's just so impressive that someone like you could like literally have anxiety about asking for something that you actually physically need. It's not a want, it's a need.
The personal story and the passion and like, I'm so comfortable that I know it's going to the right place. Sometimes it's not the money. Simple things like likes and shares on social media. Like one person shares it, that could be a whole new 1,000 people. LinkedIn might have been one of the better tools because you can tag companies and then everybody sees it. And that's been really good too. And it kind of gets me away from, just family and friends and stuff. So like, yeah, likes and shares, it's amazing. But the other big one too, like people that work for big companies, I got a lot of company matching. For example, tournament ended, 6 months ago? So we're kind of in a little bit of a quiet time financially. I just got an $800 check from Citizens, right? So it's like, I didn't even know it was coming, forgot about it. But somebody who bought a foursome that worked for Citizens put the extra 15 minutes of time in, and that makes all the difference in the world. So
it sounds like there's 3 ahas there during the process. One is like, don't be afraid to ask, because people want to help, right? 2, what you just said, which was company matching. There's a lot more people who actually take advantage of that. And there's a lot of companies that want to do it because they're committed to it. And it sounds like the third is the fact that the mission is going to resonate and people are going to relate to the cause a lot more because it's so personal to you that they want to share and create awareness. It's not just about the money you can get from those who it's them sharing and creating awareness that's much broader and will ultimately drive in more funds. Correct us if we're wrong, but all these funds go to supporting research efforts at the lab.
Yeah, so we are 100% research focused. The money right now, we are working closely specifically with Dr. Lee, but by having our own foundation allows us to be more flexible. But yeah, all this money is going to research right now, mostly around gene therapy, which seems to be the most promising for rare disease. And like we had a choice to make with the foundation. Do we brand it Sophie and us and people are helping us? or do we make it broader, like curegsd1b.com or whatever? And we chose, like, based on our network and what we wanted to do, to kind of work it around Sophie and trying to cure her, because we know with that we cure hundreds, thousands of other kids as well. A lot of people just say, hey, we love what you're doing, and they see pictures of Sophie or whatever in the family and they relate to it, right? You have kids, you're like, geez, that was also hard. Like, we're going to personalize this and put it out there. And the response has been really good. It's funny. Every day I learn something new, right? Amazon Smile, there's other programs out there. It's like every day I feel like I'm updating something in a database or doing something and just making progress every day, kind of finding another little thing. I learned how to use MailChimp. I'm like, am I going to do a newsletter? I don't know.
There's this book you got to read. It's called The Resistance by Stephen Pressfield. And it's this amazing, amazing book. The Resistance is, in short summary, it's the voice inside your head that tells you you're an idiot. And
I got that one.
Yeah, no, trust me, I have multiple personalities myself, but it is an interesting book because a lot of what you're saying is literally the resistance is holding you back. But in actuality, you've never got to know. Like, you just keep getting yeses, but in the back of your head, it's kind of like, don't do it, don't do it. You're fighting for like the most important thing.
I don't want to put people in tough spots too, because it is so personal. I feel like it is hard to say no, right? If I went up to a good friend and said, hey, this is what we're doing. So that has made it a little tough too, right? Because people do want to help. But again, it stinks why we had to do it. But it felt to me, I was like, God, I kept saying to Margot, and I mean, she's on board too, and she's helped with so much of this stuff too. And I try to let her not have to worry about this because there's so much other stress going on. So I try to take this on, but I just felt like, how do I not do this? There's a couple other families that are doing amazing things too. We've got like a little group. I mean, it's crazy to think there's like 4 of us fundraising. That's it for GSD.
Just keep your head down, man.
Yeah.
Just keep your head down.
Sophie's birthday's in December, right? It's coming up, her 3rd birthday. And it sounds like you have like almost a full month fundraiser. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We'd like to make it like an annual thing. And golf tournaments are generally expensive, relatively exclusive. You got to like golf. You got to have golf clubs. It's not like, here's $20. Like, it's different. But there's a lot of other people that want to just get involved or donate whatever amount. So December 7th, she turns 3. We're going to just have an online fundraiser. We're at close to 60 grand right now. I mean, my big goal would be 100 grand for the year. So until that doesn't happen, I think we can get there. And I've already been in contact with Dr. Lee, kind of saying like, get ready. We're trying to get to a certain number and we want to get the money in his hands before the end of the year, because they literally rely on private funding. Like, there's no big backers. I mean, thank goodness that the school has the infrastructure, but he literally has a spreadsheet of how much money he needs from private donations. So so December 7th through the end of the year, we're going to try to blow it out in such a tough year, right? Like, we didn't really start till June. COVID stuff is just, I mean, we can't even deny how much of an impact. And I also understand some people have it different. Some people have lost their jobs, but for people that can give, we're hoping to make a huge splash with that first check to present to Dr. Lee and the research, and then kind of carry that into next year. And then through that, we're going to continue doing golf. So next year will be June 21st. We're going to move that down to New Seabury, just because, again, it's a numbers game. And I think we can double the numbers down there. And I think it's just a beautiful, like, on the ocean, like a Monday down the Cape in June is not so bad. And it's right in Mashpee. So,
well, those are 2 big things. And I think what we'll do, we'll make sure to put in the show notes like how people can donate in December, because I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are dads, are moms. That's part 1. And part 2, it's the holiday season. The best thing about the holiday season is giving. It's not receiving. It always is. And so it'll be interesting. We'll try to put this out there so people can find it pretty easily.
Yeah, no, you guys have been great. The only other thing I'll say is I've never looked back and been like, geez, I wish I didn't make that donation, right? Like, there's no better feeling. And this, again, I would hope you felt inspired after that golf tournament, right? Like, you're doing something good. But I've gone to other fundraisers. Somebody needs something, and it doesn't matter how much money. Like, I see a $10 donation come in, and I tell you, like, it all matters. And I hope that people understand, like, geez, I can only do 25. I'm not going to waste 5 minutes. So we appreciate everything that comes in. 100% of that money goes into research. We pay on the side for all the website, all that sort of stuff. And we really appreciate it.